The last time we did this was in Naples earlier this year, and it was the most favorited and the most disliked. So we're it's quite a polarizing group we got up here. But you know that means you're saying something that actually strikes people. So up here we have Chris Sullivan, who is the two-time best performing hedge fund according to Barclays for the past 2 years. Paul Tarantino, CEO of Byte Federal, one of the largest Bitcoin ATM companies in the world. And then one of the most correct men this side of the Mississippi, Mr. Tom Luongo, patriarch of the Gold, Goats, and Guns hive mind. And we are here to talk about the fourth turning and the economic outlook for the next decade. So obviously there's been a lot going on. Tom, I think you did a great job maybe a couple weeks ago setting what was, what you guys called the financial chessboard. Of course, that was a couple weeks ago, and quite a bit's happened since then. So maybe if you could try and give us who's at the poker table right now.
Oh, Jesus! It's actually better to ask the question: who has what cards at the poker table? Clearly it's. And this is going to be one of those things where if you haven't heard me rant about this stuff, it may sound Greek to you. But we have a globalist cabal that is centered not in China, but in Europe. That is the real problem. We like to call them Davos, where I come from. They get together every year in Davos, Switzerland, and the Bilderberg Group and all that rotten nonsense. And you can pick your conspiracy theory of choice to fit the model. But they are the old colonial powers of Europe. They have vast sums of money in banks you've never heard of. And they control our governments. They control the governments of Europe. They control the government of the United States. They control the government of Israel. They control the government of Iran. They tried to control the government of Russia, China, and everybody else. So anybody who tries to get out from underneath them gets the hammer. They always get the horns. And much of our history of the world and our own history here in the US, and even our monetary history, as we've discussed today, relative to Bitcoin, the Fed, and everything else, isn't really what you might think it actually is. Because we have their control system is our dollar out there in the world. The offshore dollar system, as Chris will point out, is 20 times the domestic dollar market. Because of that, we've never really been free here in America of our old colonial masters that we supposedly fought a war of independence from in 1776 to 81. They've controlled our markets through trade imbalances, and eventually through giving us their central bank model. We were the Iran, for lack of a better term, in 1913. If you've heard the idea that the only reason we're going after Iran is because they don't have a central bank that the quote-unquote Rothschilds control. This is the landscape. So who's at the table right now? It is Trump and the sovereigntists in America, some of whom are our greatest enemies here in this room. That would be some of the major banks, the DOD, even parts of the intelligence departments, and even parts of the
Fed?
No, and especially the Federal Reserve, because they're the ones who actually have the power to fight the people that we're actually trying to win our independence from. If you accept that premise, and that's a big premise to accept, and it was a big premise for me to accept in 2021 when I started to make this idea click in my head, because I was like everybody, like almost every Bitcoiner you ever met. The hell with the Fed. They're evil. But what if they're the victim and not the villain? What if also, once we understand that they've been the victim, they're also the mechanism by which to become the hero? Hero, victim, villain is the essential triad of all narrative. And only viewing players at the table through one of those lenses leaves you with an incomplete picture. So from everybody's perspective, they are always the hero of their own story. And ultimately, they can be the villain on the other side, and they can always be the victim of somebody else. So what if the Fed has been a captured pawn since after World War II and the rise of the euro-dollar market, setting the cost of capital for the United States? And what if what Trump is actually doing with tariffs and this and everything he's trying to do, and bringing Bitcoin on board, and the stable coins and everything else, what if all of that is to reverse the flow of capital as opposed to having the money go out and us pay interest on debt, have it all come back and stay here? And what if I told you that he would not have been able to even attempt to do any of this if Jerome Powell hadn't switched the world from a LIBOR-based standard to a SOFR-based standard?
Which is the LIBOR and SOFR are
they are the debt, one of what used to be the debt indexing rate of the dollar for the entire world. Every debt contract in the world up until 2022 was written against LIBOR.
To Tom's point, think of how hilarious it is. Do we know what LIBOR stands for? London Interbank Overnight Rate. Wait, what?
Offered rate.
Sorry. Wait, we're basing U.S. mortgages, corporate bonds, high-yield bonds, muni bonds on a rate in London? Like, think of how ridiculous that concept is.
But that's what it was. Okay.
For a century.
Well, only since 1984.
But then
the Plaza Accord in 1985, where we rigged all the currency markets, and then the crash in
high level, gentlemen, high level,
and the S&L crisis, and it's all part of that same process.
The Bank of England setting the cost of money has been since 1814.
In effect, I mean, but with LIBOR, and I'll pass it over to Paul in just a second. But when we moved off of LIBOR, which was an agreed upon rate by 18 City of London banks, not the American economy, and we switched over to a SOFR standard in 2022, where SOFR is the indexing rate, and that's a market rate based on what happens in our repo markets and our money markets. What you do every day, the demand for money within our economy is what sets the rate. The Fed actually now has to, in effect, has almost ceded monetary policy to you.
Define SOFR real quick.
So SOFR is the secured overnight financing rate. It is a market-driven rate of what actually happens in the money markets every day. Everybody goes out and the banks all bid, they buy and sell against SOFR in order to buy money what they need on a regular basis. And as long as that rate shows no stress on a daily basis relative to what the Fed is setting at the Fed funds rate, as long as those two things are in conjunction, there's no stress in our markets. Well, guess what? In 2022, when Powell started raising rates, how many of you thought that the world was going to crash because they went above 1%? Zero Hedge told you it was going to happen. Peter Schiff told you it was going to happen. Every Austrian economist in the world told you it was going to happen, except this one. I said, no, that's not what's going to happen, because Chris and I know you and I were talking about this back then. This is serious. Like, I had Chris on the podcast back then, the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast. We talked about this. And I said, Chris, we're going to finally find out what our economy can handle for the first time in 60 years. And now we're in the war because we're winning. And that's why they're threatening us with nuclear fire. That's why they won't give up in Ukraine. That's why they won't give up in Iran. That's the layout. That's where it starts. Now let's talk about whether or not we're going to win.
So we can win. How do we, Paul? I mean, like, what do you think about this? Like, we just set the stage.
Yeah, well, am I on?
You got flick it up.
All right, we just talked about LIBOR, and that does make sense from the perspective of if you understand that the London banks are running the world, right? So if they're setting the rate for the world, that tells you that they're in charge, right? So they're in charge, and we, the United States, and others have been the strong arm of that colonial empire. Mm-hmm. So winning for us Bitcoiners, psychopaths, looks like destroying these London banks, breaking these colonial ties. We never won in 1776, right? We never won our independence. We have been, and I think I grew up not understanding this. I think most of us, and there's many of us in the room that still don't understand this, and I'm still on my journey to learn it even more. We've never been independent. We've always been in this fight to separate ourselves from the central banks of the world. as Tom said, everyone who's tried to do that is either dead or sanctioned or an enemy of the state, debanked, etc. We now have a president, the entire family has been debanked. That entire family is looking at the Fed, looking at the big banks of the world saying, what the F? So, we'll see how this plays out, but winning means using tools like Bitcoin, using tools like lawfare, and using your individual opting into sovereignty, because you are actually the most powerful people in this game, whether you get it or not. You opting out of their system kills their system. That's why we bought Bitcoin.
So talk to John Burnett about how to do that later.
We are the fuel that's burning this fire, and the more that we separate from the system, the more we will slowly drain all the energy out of that colonial empire that's been destroying us as humans and destroying the world for centuries.
I think it's important to frame both what Tom and Paul said into historical and thus economic context, because this is about four turnings. Has everybody read Strauss-Howe? Does everybody know what four turnings are? John does.
That's a lot of head nods.
So not everybody, and we'll convert this to Q&A shortly, but it's essentially a dividing historical cycles in seasons and by generations. It has four periods, and they're called secula. The one we are in now, most of us would agree, marked the beginning of the crisis period in 2001. And you begin at a high and you end at a crisis, and in between there's an awakening and transition and upheaval, et cetera. So noting where we are historically, you can help prepare yourself mentally, physically, and financially to anticipate, based on previous crisis periods of other four turnings, on how to handle everything. And as Paul mentioned and articulated beautifully, Bitcoin is like the tip of the sword for both the consciousness and the conscientiousness, right? Tom described the conscientiousness of who the players are, and then I'm saying it's a higher consciousness asset, which is one of the vectors that we fight back in a nonviolent way.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in the material aspect of it, like I'm making more money, I have a lot more purchasing power. And it makes them content to just I'm just going to sit back and wait and just kind of see how things go. When it comes to the consciousness side of things, you call this a higher consciousness asset. How do people evolve from the materialist aspect of I'm making more money on this to, oh no, I'm actually opting out of a literally actually evil system? And then grappling with the fact that if this is actually evil, then there is good. And then now you have to choose that.
You can't have one without the other, yeah.
So what do you see as, obviously it's not like a switch flip, but whether that transition period between I'm investing, I'm making money versus I'm actually taking my life back?
I think it depends on what leads you to Bitcoin. I think if it's the speculative wanderlust and profit seeking, I think eventually you'll get humbled into the ethos of it. And I think if you're coming from the other angle where you are conscious and conscientious and you're opting out of the system of darkness, either way you're going to arrive at the same point, just through two different pathways, in my opinion.
And so, Paul, what now? If this is a battle between all these forces, obviously there is a timeline on which they are trying to keep people down versus people trying to stand up. We're talking about the economic outlook for the next decade. What percentage do you think the good versus the evil is now, and where do you see that slider over the?
That's an easy softball question, Tom.
I'm sorry, you get to answer that one, Paul.
Hold on 1 second. Let me get my download.
It's the silver-lined hat.
I don't know. I come from the perspective that good and evil is always present, and you're going to choose that. I think that's part of why we as humans incarnate here on Earth. Why we are here to try and bring, whether you want to call it heaven to earth, from good to fight evil, whatever that is, we're supposed to improve this existence through our experience and bringing that here to Earth. So through that process, so Bitcoin for me, right, started just like everybody else with this, like, oh I'm going to get rich. That'll help me. And then it becomes, wait, it's aligning me with something more true than wealth, more honest than what I'm seeing around the current financial system is seeing around me. And so you start to get this sort of internal alignment of, I can participate economically in the world and be a good person and have the right incentives for me and my family and my friends. And so participating in the network itself just naturally elevates you away, out of greed to a higher purpose, I guess, is where I would say.
And I fundamentally don't believe that Bitcoin is the only asset that does that. Okay. Correct. Let's make this abundantly clear. It's called gold, goats, and guns for a reason, right? A very, very specific reason. Tom, really was my life.
I'm going to steal it. It's going to be sats, steers, and sovereignty.
That'll work. I like gold, goats, guns, gams, and games too. But we keep adding G's to the list internally. It's really funny because you all know that I'm a.
But Bitcoin's a tool. It's not the end.
But what I mean is that it's about. I mean, I had the same. It was funny. I was listening to the other people earlier, talking about how I don't want to spend sats on that. Like I have to put Bitcoin on the table to buy that crappy thing. I used to walk around with 2 silver coins in my pocket. That's how I stopped myself from spending money I didn't want to spend. And really, what you come to realize, I think, at some point, and I don't know about anybody else, and I'm more than happy to talk about my personal trauma in my life, and I realize as I've gotten older why I behave the way I do, right? Why do I buy things I don't need, or why do I engage in self-destructive behavior, or whatever? It's all coping mechanisms for past trauma, right? Like, I had crappy parents, or you had this or that. We all have our own story, and what I'm getting at is that when you align yourself properly, as Paul said, with your purpose in your life, that you you try and marry all those things to how you spend your money, how you save your money, and then how you make your money in order to live your life, because you want to pass that on to your progeny, or and you now have a purpose, and you have an ethos, and then you're going to create, and with an ethos, then you create a telos. The biggest problem I've had in the last 3 or 4 years is coming to the painful realization that as libertarians, we haven't built anything. And maybe Bitcoin is the thing that we build. And that would be great. But it's fundamentally because at the core, there was a negation of what was, it was built on an idea of a negation of the existing system, as opposed to saying this was better. Now, I got attracted to libertarianism because I understood it was about the thing. But too many are about the critique and not about the build. And we want to stay in the build mindset always. And that's how you're going to beat these people, because they don't know what they are at a moment in time today, this weekend, literally, threatening us with nuclear fire. And you have to ask yourself, why would they be so desperate to go to the nuclear option?
Because they're losing.
Whenever you're in an escalatory ladder, you hit the nuclear option, you have nowhere else to go, right? So,
I think, Tom, what you just keyed off in my head, which we all should humble ourselves a little bit and recognize that what an utter privilege, as bad as everything is, because a lot of where the angst comes from is being jammed into a fiat system, whether you're conscious of it or not, and you want to get rich quick, you want it to be easier because it's fucking awful, right? They set it up that way. But also recognizing what a privilege it is to be alive today and to be able to opt into something through your own free will and choice that literally stands in opposition to what's been done to all of our bloodlines, whether European or American, African, South African, Asian, et cetera, because it's all but maybe 6 countries now, because they're going to stand up a Rothschild bank in Iran by Monday.
No, they're not.
I hope not too. But it's just such a blessing to not have to immediately take up swords, is my point. And all you have to do is choose a different instrument to invest in and get all of that benefit of you are rebelling, you are building wealth, you are doing good. And that's very unique, and not very many instruments over time have delivered that. And so I think we all should recognize that privilege.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct, Chris. It is great. We are in a place where technology is coming together to allow us to communicate in ways that they can't control, and that's a really important. It's a really important thing. They thought they were going to be able to continually seed us with false realities through the internet and through control of the social media space and everything else, and constantly, and they're still doing it. I mean, they're every day I wake up and I see another psyop like laying out there, either on the Twitter algorithms or wherever, and it's so obvious at this point. But we've gotten so good at identifying them now that we can debunk them in real time. There's an entire class of warriors out there that exist with glee to get up in the morning and debunk nonsense in real time. I mean, yeah, we call them 4chan, but they're hilarious. but they're real, and they do it for free. Like, how cool is that? And you just gotta let them do their thing, right? And then it all seeds into the zeitgeist, and and then we beat them, and then we laugh at them, and we move on. And then every day, they're trying to co-opt Bitcoin right now, and we have to be very careful about that. Right? They're absolutely trying to co-opt Bitcoin. Anybody who thinks that BlackRock is not buying Bitcoin, getting you to buy into their ETF by selling it as a loss leader with 0.25% holding fees on Bitcoin is insane.
And the pass-through is about 4.5 because you. Anyways, that's not why we're up
here.
But
it's important. What's important? What I'm getting at is that for something like BlackRock, what they want to do is they want to. But why do you hate Disney now? Because one, you were told to hate Disney because Disney was subverted from within by BlackRock controlling the board and then destroying all of your cultural touchstones. Because these people are commies and they're vampires and they're evil.
Yep.
And they want to destroy everything that makes your life good and decent.
Yeah, I think it's also important to, if we all.
So don't make Bitcoin. My point is, don't let BlackRock turn Bitcoin into Disney.
Anybody who buys.
So we have Black Goat Bambi.
Let me, Paul, real quick. I've read all the prospectuses because I'm a psycho nerd. This is the main reason, albeit fee is maybe one vector. You need to go to page, it's like 73 or 63, because literally a subsidiary of DTC was created to own the custodied Bitcoin at Coinbase. You already don't own any of your stocks, bonds, and checking accounts. See 1964 dematerialization of securities. But the most important reason to avoid BlackRock, in addition to knowing they're the dark lords of evil, is that you don't own the Bitcoin. It's infinitely worse than owning it at a qualified custodian.
Right.
All I was going to say, with BlackRock, Wall Street, finding Bitcoin. They're on the same path. They're only looking at Bitcoin from the perspective of how do we get rich? How do we create more fiat with Bitcoin? So they're cycle one, right? You all are cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, wherever you're at. Cycle one is all about getting rich. What we have to realize is that these, I'll be nice, folks, are going to be the hardest to orange pill. For real. It's going to be the hardest group. They're going to actually be, and this is where I think it fits into the fourth turning discussion. They're going to be the hardest to convert to real Bitcoiners. And that fight, now that the Trojan horse is behind the wall, that's when that Trojan horse opens up and Wall Street starts to bifurcate on real Bitcoin and we're going to get rich with Bitcoin, you're going to see a real cycle. And this is where I think that a lot of us in this room have gone and maybe thought we won. And I don't want to be a doomer because, believe me, I can go there. But I think we all have to just be aware of the fight, witness the fight, be willing to call them out on it, and stand our ground and hold on to our real coins. this is the way we'll win. We'll be the only ones standing with World Bitcoin when this is over.
Well, and what's the other? I mean, you're absolutely correct, Paul. But understand something. I just want to make a finer point on things. Wall Street is being forced to adopt Bitcoin. It's in the process right now. The financial system doesn't have enough collateral. Doesn't have enough pristine collateral. There isn't enough gold unless we move gold to prices that that everyone's uncomfortable with. Because the higher the price of gold goes, the more the world looks around and goes, uh-oh, that's dangerous. Okay, that's an uncertainty moment. What they're trying to do now, they have to do this. They have to allow the price of pristine collateral, gold, Bitcoin, to rise in a way that is not disruptive and effectively go through another big round of inflation. That's what we're dealing with right now. I came to the conclusion that the Fed has stopped fighting the rising gold price about 5 years ago. You know, who's fighting a rising gold price is London. The LBMA, the LME, they're fighting it. We're actually literally draining the LBMA right now through Scott Bessent, the Treasury Department. He's literally draining the LBMA. It's beautiful to watch.
The gold coming here from London and the Bank of International Settlements is proof of what Tom's saying.
Yeah, and it's even worse than that. I was talking to Martin Armstrong about this when we were up in Calgary together, and Marty said, "Yeah, I know Bessent. And when he worked for Soros, I traded against him in the '90s, and he's very good." And he's better than the traders in London that are currently there. So he has something at his disposal that a lot of people none of us have. He has the U.S. Treasury Department. He can use that he can literally use their general account every day, and the Fed's SOM account every day. These are tools and weapons that we have, and they're currently, in my read of the game board, in the hands of people who care about who don't want to see commercial banking go away. The point of the problem we're dealing with these evil freaking people over in Europe is they want a central bank digital currency that destroys the relationship between you and your bank so that you have only a relationship with the central bank who has a programmable currency that they can say, you're fat, you don't get to eat pizza.
Wouldn't that be good?
You are a bad person. You said evil things about Ursula von der Satan on Twitter. You don't get a car loan. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't even get a bank account anymore. That's the world that they want. Now, in that world, do we need commercial banks? No. So why would J.P. Morgan go along with this? Why would Bank of America go along with this? Why would Goldman go along with it? They're not the central bank. They're the holder. They are the shareholders in the Fed. The Fed actually works for them. They're the shareholders of the New York Fed. The Fed's job is to protect our banking system, the commercial banking system. Jerome Powell was not lying when he said, I don't want a central bank digital currency. He's like, why would he? He has the most powerful currency in the world. There's not the most powerful money, but he does have the most powerful currency. And that's his primary product. So why would he do anything to try to destroy that? So eventually Wall Street saw the threat to themselves and and went along with the implementation of SOFR. And now you have to recreate in America the political and investment environment where they don't have to go to Hong Kong or to Singapore or to sub-Saharan Africa to chase yield or play around with our money in CDOs and property markets, and they can go out there and they can go invest in pipelines and tool and die factories and shipbuilding enterprises, which Trump has talked about, and then leave the small stuff, the libraries in Palatka, and all of that stuff to the medium banks.
That's a great point that Tom is bringing up, and actually I heard kind of Alex Craner explain this really, really well recently.
Well,
and
Alex is brilliant.
He's brilliant. Where these big, like the big London banks, the colonialism all stemmed from the fact that they needed additional collateral. So they went out to conquer the world so that they had more assets to lend against, right? So, and then we became the army. We became the economic hitmen. We became the strong arm of that system. So once you see it from that perspective historically, the United States now looks like this giant new colony for our U.S. banks to rebuild on and recollateralize the system on. And I think maybe that's what you're saying. They're trying to engineer.
Yeah, well, that's what I am saying, and more importantly, the the history we think we know about all of this stuff is wrong. We've been turned into the scapegoat for a system that never died. Now, that scapegoating process is everywhere. And notice who's never, ever, ever blamed for anything. Oh, no, everybody's not blaming the Jews, and they're blaming the Americans, and they're blaming this one, and they're blaming that one, but never blaming the Limeys, never blaming the French, never blaming the Dutch, never blaming the Germans.
The Swiss.
They blame SWIFT. And now, and all this is why they're not going to push a central bank on Iran. You want to know why? Because SWIFT is irrelevant now.
No, he said Swiss.
Oh, the Swiss.
Well,
the Swiss national
the
bank.
head
Yeah,
of,
absolutely.
The head of their apparatus is the Bank of International Settlements.
Zurich,
Yeah.
right, and Hong Kong, Singapore, and those are all the new outposts. And Hong Kong and Singapore are the new outposts of what remains of the British Empire. The British Empire never died. I mean, they like to put out propaganda that they're just a bunch of sexually repressed, neurotic people. And don't get me wrong, it's usually funny, but it's not true. Because if you look at what's happened to England, not City of London, it's been destroyed like we have. Their main
Tom,
streets,
explain the difference.
Their farms, they have been destroyed.
Maybe, does everybody know the City of London is its own city-state? Okay.
Just like Washington, D.C., just like the Vatican.
Right, and there's only 3 of them that may be correlated.
And what's important is I was chatting with my friend Ian Burlingame about this, and he's like, has anybody gone to the Midlands in England? It's a wasteland. Every time I think about that, all I can think of is that how did Stanley Kubrick make Full Metal Jacket and never leave England to recreate Vietnam? Well, because it hasn't been rebuilt since it was bombed in World War II. Because British communism is a special kind of stupid.
So, if I may, you all three have a very vast catalog of podcasts that you've all been on, and everyone should 100% inject Gold, Ghosts, and Guns straight into your veins as much as possible. Especially the episodes of Chris, and then Paul, Chris, and John went on a Bitcoin Matrix podcast and had a very long conversation about this as well. But we can listen to those later. I think the value is they're here right now, and so are you. So, who has questions for any of these gentlemen? Right there.
Good question.
So how does Basel III incorporate into the recapitalization of the big banks?
He's been nodding all day, so I've been watching every time I speak, nodding all day. I'm like, ooh, he said the magic words, Basel III. So there's 2 things. The 2 things we've heard this week. One, I saw stuff. I see so much stuff on a daily basis, I can't actually interact with it all. But Vince Lanci noted that gold still isn't a Tier 1 capital asset under Basel III. I have it on very good authority from people who work at J.P. Morgan and other places, and I hate to say it like that, but I've become a node for people. They send me information, right? That the Basel III endgame, which Damien Dimon has been complaining about bitterly, is dead. We're never going to implement the Basel III capital adequacy rules here in the United States. To give everybody the context of what I just said, that means is Basel III was written by a bunch of Europeans to further force American GSIBs, globally systemic important banks, J.P. Morgan, Goldman, all the GSIB banks, the important ones, that they had to hold extra capital against their balance sheet, against their risk-weighted portfolio, based on a formula written by them. Okay? And they would require them to hold anywhere from 10 to 30% more capital against their deposits. What that means is it's really no different. All it really is, that's the technical thing. Think of it this way. It's just a barrier. It's just a way to make our banks as uncompetitive as their banks. Our banks are better than their banks. So how do we make that happen? How do we level that playing field? Well, we make them uncompetitive. Davos's answer, Europe's answer to everything is make the other guy who's doing it better than us less competitive.
And it would also...
It doesn't matter the industry.
Artificially reduce the money supply instantly, creating a depression.
Yes. And then, so on the other side of it, what are we actually trying to do in the Trump administration? What are they trying to do? They're trying to get rid of the supplemental leverage ratio. Now, I did a podcast with Caitlin Long, great Bitcoiner, right? Episode 213 of my podcast. And again, I'm not pimping this one for me.
Listen to that podcast. I'll pimp it.
I'm like, Caitlin like blows my mind. And I sit there like, oh my God. Okay, I don't understand. And then I got it on re-listen. She was going on about the supplemental leverage ratio, which is another one of these things that were put in place with Dodd-Frank by the Democrats, like Elizabeth Warren, who work for our enemies in Europe. She's not communist, she's just evil. And she's a harpy and she likes control. So the supplemental leverage ratio doesn't make any sense. Like it or not, I know I'm in a room with a bunch of Bitcoiners, but the U.S. Treasury is considered the world's risk-free asset. Why? Because the U.S. has never defaulted. Okay? I mean, the risk, writing a credit default swap against U.S. debt is dumb, but people do it anyway. Because the risk of default is literally zero. It's the default rate. It's the risk-free rate, for lack of a better term. Even if it's not true, it is de facto, not or de jure, not de facto. So why do our banks have to have supplemental reserves against their holdings of U.S. Treasuries? This is a risk-free asset. Why do I have to hold extra capital against the risk? Oh, because Davos needs us to. Because the Dutch banks are uncompetitive. Because the London banks are uncompetitive. Because they want our banks starved of capital. They want our economy starved of capital. So that our banks can't lend and you guys can't start businesses and be innovative. It's just that simple. They hate us. And they want us to die. And we blew up the Georgia Guidestones as a big... I don't know how else to say it, but it's true. And and everywhere you look, you see the same thing everywhere. Every issue always comes down to, and it's always them complaining. It's always them doing this. They had their little troll of Treasury for 4 years under the Biden junta, Janet Yellen, literally destroying our yield, deforming our yield curve. So that every Bitcoiner in the room and every Austrian and every libertarian was saying, see, Powell doesn't know what he's doing with interest rates. I'm like, she's just selling twos and she's buying twos and selling 30s. She was doing yield curve control because that's what Janet Yellen's middle name is. Janet Yield Curve Control Yellen.
I thought it was Goblin.
I mean, it's not tough, folks. Once you know the players at the table and their incentives, you know how they're going to act. And so this is why it's important. Okay, I think we have another. I'll shut up.
That was a good question. Thank you.
At the Treasury level, I assume is what you're talking about?
The question is bid bonds, right?
It depends on the issuer is part of my answer.
The U.S. government.
I think that I hate all government and don't like any political apparatus making decisions at the economic level, but we got to play the hand we're dealt. Right. I think it is PSYOP adjacent, perhaps. But there's not enough evidence to prove it one way or the other. I think the concept iterates exactly why Bitcoin is here. It's to be pristine collateral, recapitalize the economics and the financials of all of, whether it's corporate, privates, whatever, governments, into the hands back of the people and reconstitute rule of law. And all of our, all the things we should be following, but our politicians do not. It's maybe not what I would choose, but I can't say it's a PSYOP with full faith.
Yeah, whether it's a PSYOP or not, what I think we can do is we can kind of look down the road what that means. Because we see this happening not only in bit bonds, but we see it happening in Bitcoin-backed companies. So all the zombie companies and empty shells of publicly traded companies that are becoming Bitcoin treasury companies now. Everyone's using Bitcoin as a life raft to get to some point down the road. So putting a Bitcoin or a percentage of Bitcoin underneath the treasury is like, we're going to keep this, we're going to add some flotation to the treasury to get across this time period. And what that does, and I think this was illustrated by the way Saifedean described Tether, having 10% of their backing of Tether being in Bitcoin. Over time, does that become 90% of the backing of Tether? Does over time that 10% Bitcoin become 90% of the backing of the Treasury? It will illustrate to Wall Street, it will illustrate to those people that are in phase one of Bitcoin adoption in finance that the real energy in the room and the real power in the room is Bitcoin. So we might, you can look at it however we want, but them implementing these tools to try and save their butt is just going to wake the rest of the world up.
The downside is that they will remove price discovery from the markets themselves and weaponize whatever collateral ratio the knock-ins are. And to Paul's point on the companies, for any of those contrarian bears in this audience, that will represent one of the greatest short trades in our recent history.
Fourth turning.
Well, gentlemen, we could sit up here for another 2 hours. Is there even such thing as a quick question with these guys? But quick, Fabio.
Using historical reference for these fourth turnings, historically, how long do they take? And looking forward into this one, is it going to be accelerated because now we live in a digital world versus...
Historically, they are 20 to 40 years, with kind of the longest cadence being 55. That's looking all the way back into the 11th century, essentially. But I would argue it's both, because time is nonlinear. So we have...
So we said quick question.
I think you accelerate the outcome, perhaps, but I think you might delay the process, right? Because they've kicked the can now, what, since... Go ahead.
So when you, if you haven't read The Fourth Turning, right, it's a transition. So as we're rolling into probably the darkest point of The Fourth Turning now.
Sure.
And we're also simultaneously seeing some of the green shoots that come up to the next cycle. Thank you. And you know, when you watch that in real time, you just want to start planting your seeds in that new cycle. And that, to me, that means Bitcoin, technology, and commodities. So when you're starting to think of like, how do I get to this next cycle and make sure that I and my family and my friends are safe and secure? That's why I say sats, steers, and sovereignty. It's literally that. It's literally stack Bitcoin, secure your food supply, secure water, secure resources, secure your family. That's what sovereignty is, right? It's becoming a powerful unit that can stand up against wild forces, right? Whether it's the state, whether it's terrorist actors, whether it's some rogue individual that thinks that they've got the right answer for humanity. You have the right answers for yourself, so plant your seeds in that future. Focus on that. This shit is happening whether we want it or not. We're not going to stop it. So, and that's sort of the learning of the fourth turning, is that it is inevitable and it is destructive, but it gives us the opportunity to build an amazing future.
No, it's it's the Schumpeter's creative destruction writ large. You're correct. I'm not a huge. The older I get, the less I'm enamored of the Strauss and Howe model. It's a nice thing. It's nice. So I'm not a. I do believe in cycles though, and I do also believe that Martin Armstrong is correct in that we have come to the end of a 6-cycle wave of 51. I just think this
Grand
is the end of a
supercycle.
big 300-year cycle. A lot of these are tied to solar cycles. We can get into all that stuff during the soiree. I don't care. I'll be happy to chat about solar physics after this as well. But all of this is in service of, I think Paul's correct that we're hitting the peak of the cycle. I like to look at the fourth turning model as a generational thing. I go keep it generation. Generations are roughly 20 to 25 years. So this started with the financial crisis in 2008, not 9/11. The dollar reserve standard ended, no, even Strauss and Howe said it. Like, go to the Fourth Turning website. They're like,
Gentlemen.
the Fourth Turning started in 2006.
Quick question.
What's that?
Quick.
I know, quick. So my point is that if so, then we're about halfway through it, as Paul would say. 9/11 was not the turn. The end of the
That was the nominal high of the stock market, or real high of the stock
but that's
market.
not what this is. Theirs is their model. Using their model, it's definitely 2008. They even said so. which means that their artist generation starts with the year my daughter was born in 2006. And I can tell you that there's a shift in those kids. Those kids are not like the rest of us. And I mean that in a good way, actually. I certainly mean that in a good way. And they're the ones that are looking at what's going on now, and they're going to decide what world we're going to live in for the next 100 years. The game never ends. It's not a board game, folks. It's a cycle. It's a series of cycles. It's what John Osterman said at the end of The Watchmen. Nothing ever ends. And the game is going to continue on. So whatever mistakes, we're going to fix a lot of things this time, and we're going to break a lot of things. And Donald Trump is going to fix a lot of things, and he's going to make a lot of mistakes.
The bringer of chaos.
The great champion is a great champion for that reason. So with that said, just understand that there's both opportunity and danger. And the big one is, don't get so focused on any one part of the aspect of this cycle. Bitcoin is part of it. There are plenty of opportunities out there in the world beyond what's in this room today. And the longer I'm in this game, having gone all through Austrian economics, all of it, Bitcoin from the beginning, all of it, the more I'm convinced that it's all going to be a part of the system. The new system is going to be a hybrid. It will be. In the time frame that it matters to anybody in this room, which is your investing horizon, which is your children, which is what you're going to pass on to your progeny horizon. Okay? So that would be the way I would say.
Great. Yeah, please round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen.